Well, it is a beautiful sunny day in north central Idaho today, and it is much welcomed. Unfortunately, I'm not sure people are going to be able to do much with it because we had anywhere between a quarter to 3/4 of an inch of rain over the weekend. Uh, so we're still drying out enough to be able to get out and do some much needed field work or even finish up planting.
Hi guys,
Good morning, Mr. Gellings.
how is everybody today? Good.
I'm happy to see the sun.
You up in Moscow, Doug?
Lewiston.
Lewiston. Well, there you go. Well, that's good. How's things going up there?
Well, that'll be the first thing I'll lead off with is some comments about where we're at. But the short answer is things are compressed and we've been getting much needed moisture a little bit later than we'd like to see it. And
Right.
that's why things are compressed
Well,
with
there
our
you go.
planting windows.
I have a young lady up in Genesee that I just talked with the other day. And there was a while when they were waiting for the fields to dry out so they could even get in there and do some spraying. So you must have a little bit of moisture up there, but this was a while ago. So
We're going to see prevent plant acres in the counties around here this year because of the uh, frequency with which we've had late spring moisture,
right.
and that has really pushed it's created extended periods with wet draws and north slopes, and
Right.
it's been difficult to access fields. Well, we're 3 minutes after. Kasha, Juliet, think we ought to get rolling? Okay, excellent. Well, welcome to the second Ag Talk Tuesday, everyone. Happy to see so many people on. The topic of today's discussion is going to be FSA programs and policies. My name is Doug Finkelberg. I'm an area extension educator based out of Lewiston. I serve the grain growing counties in north central Idaho. And as we've just been discussing, we've been getting our much needed moisture. It seems like we've gotten March's expected moisture and temperatures in May. And that has created a situation where folks were able to plant early and then they couldn't get out at all. So we're going to be testing a lot of our seed treatment packages because we've had seeds sitting in ground that's that's a little too cool for a long time before things emerge, and it's delayed emergence and it's slowed emergence. But at the same time, with these prolonged cool, wet conditions, our fall crop is looking better and better. So the fall wheat is looking almost better by the day in places where it came up strong. We had a decent winter survival, and things were looking kind of average, but now they're really perking up from there. So fall wheat, fall canola, fall peas, they are looking better recently, which is really encouraging. Of course, this cool, wet weather is really good for fungal diseases. So we know that rust is on its way. The latest update from the USDA was we've got 5 to 7 days before we should start really scouting our susceptible varieties and forearming ourselves for what's going to come next. But I always like to say that rust is a good problem to have to worry about because it means that in our dryland region we have enough water. And without the years we don't worry about stripe rust, we typically are taking a yield hit because of lack of moisture. So that's a quick update from my end. I'd like to try to reach around the state a little bit and to some other cropping systems and see if we've got anybody who'd like to volunteer what's going on in their neighborhood. I can just start picking out people at random unless you want to go, Juliet.
Since we're already on cereals, I could talk a little bit about the cereal situation. You already mentioned the fact that stripe rust has been accumulating in some of the areas, especially in Oregon right now. So areas around Walla Walla and around some of the Pendleton areas, they're starting to show quite a bit of susceptibility in stripe rust. And I have an email this morning from Ryan Graebner Coombs that indicated that there was quite a bit of stripe rust actually already showing up in the area where he does his work, especially in the susceptible varieties like UI Magic. So there's a number of varieties that we consider susceptible, but the UI Magic is particularly susceptible. And it's still a ways downstream of us. Now it's directly downstream of northern Idaho. So Doug was spot on when he said, you know, we need to start thinking about scouting in northern Idaho. Northern and mid Idaho needs to be taking a look pretty strongly at whether or not stripe rust shows up. We are not quite downwind of that same pocket of stripe rust. However, with the winds that we've been having, very strong winds and erratic winds, it's quite possible that we could get some stripe rust infection in southern Idaho. I want people, especially to the west of Idaho on the western side, to start scouting as soon as possible and let us know whether or not stripe rust starts to show up. So that way we can at least be predictive of whether or not stripe rust could be coming into the southern part of Idaho. One of the things I do want to mention is we've paid attention to the weather. If you look at Agrium or Agrible, the weather forecast through Nutrient Ag, they are still predicting Pacific Northwest to be in a very much cool pattern for another 2 weeks, and then warm to hot into the beginning of summer to the end of summer, extremely hot, possibly in August. So these conditions that we are having, the extended cold conditions, are perfect for stripe rust to take root. Actually, not to take root, but to take leaf, if we want to get accurate, and to become problematic in our susceptible varieties. And then as it warms up very quickly, we could have a very rapid generation of cycles of stripe rust, and it could go from kind of dormant and latent to popping in June. So we're going to be keeping an eye on that. The concern does come with the fact that there are potential frost warnings in the Pacific Northwest all the way through the end of June, and then potentially it comes off hot and dry, which adds a whole nother layer of stress for the crop. So that's one of the things that I'm paying attention to for small grains. Currently, the winter crop under irrigation looks pretty darn fantastic. If you can keep the irrigation on, it looks like the winter crop that is established and going should be a nice crop. Spring crop, it's some areas has been 30 days to emergence, but once it's up and going, it should be doing okay. We will be paying attention again to that sudden shift to hot, dry conditions and the potential impact on yield. So too early to say what the conditions will be for Fusarium head blight. That is something that we have to wait and see when heading emerges, when heading comes to be the predominant crop growth stage. I can't think of too much other than that, other than the fact that the growing degree days have had a tremendous delay on crop growth, and it's going to be a while to catch up if we do catch up to previous years on growing degree days. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
Juliet, can I ask you a quick question? So I heard that even though some of the grain was barely emerging spring grain, that people were so worried about the water that they were turning on their irrigation and just to try to get that water down. Does that really hurt that crop a lot as far as, only being up just a little bit? I mean, the way when I used to farm, I'd really try to let that dry out, let those roots go down as deep as they could. But what are you hearing on that? Is that happening, what you're seeing up there, at least in our area? I say our from Idaho Falls, so. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I've had concern with, and especially it was pretty detrimental last year. Last year, there was no subsoil moisture. So even if you had good irrigation, you were still only farming the top as much as 6 to 12 inches because the roots could not go further down anyway because the subsoil moisture was so depleted. This year, the subsoil moisture isn't as depleted, and my hope is that we can get the roots going down with that moisture as much as possible. So the concern for me, and you're right, Matt, you do want those roots to seek the moisture and go down as much as possible, but we have to have the moisture there to start with. And my concern was whether or not we even had that moisture there to start with. And while we have the water, if you don't have good subsoil moisture, it is important to irrigate maybe a little extra in the spring to get that subsoil moisture built up to the point where the roots can actually go down and follow the moisture into the soil. So it's kind of a balancing act. And that's a good point, Matt.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody from
right.
Southwest Idaho?
I'm in Parma. I can talk about potatoes and onions.
That'd be great.
Okay, well, like most other crops, we're struggling with the cool, wet weather. Onions really are critical for herbicide tolerance to have a wax build up on the outside of the leaves. That's what makes them resistant to the herbicide. So with this cool, wet weather and the wind, you can't get out there and spray. So the weeds are getting ahead of the onions. And so a lot of guys struggling with weed control in onions. For potatoes, we're just starting to emerge on a few fields now. Finally, some of those fields have been in the ground getting close to 60 days, which is unusual. We looked at the relationship between growing degree days and the number of days it takes potatoes to emerge. And what I'm predicting based on the data we've had the last 7 years is that it's going to take 43 days for our potatoes planted the first part of April to emerge, which would be this Thursday. And based on how they're coming through, I saw a few coming up yesterday. I think that's going to be pretty accurate. Normal is 33 days over the last 7 years. So we're 10 days behind on emergence here in Southwest Idaho, which makes things like seed decay more probable because you're asking that seed to sit in the ground a long time before that plant emerges. So we're starting to hear rumblings about seed decay in a few fields over here. That's all I can report. We do post growing degree days on our Cal's potato website. I can put that address in the chat if people would like to be able to access that.
Please do.
Okay.
Yeah, please do, because even the agromet data is at Aberdeen is not available. So even the Kimberly data would be great for us. So please do.
Yeah, we've been posting Parma, Kimberly, and Shelley since Aberdeen's not available.
That's really interesting. I'm going to jump in, Mike. That's I mean, we always would worry about that with Rhizoc, but with the better seed treatments, I guess you're looking at that is probably the better seed treatments and making sure you have good certified seed on that. But boy, you get these springs like this, and I imagine there is a lot of concern.
Pamela, can I mention something?
Yeah.
This is Jeff Wynn. I work with FMC and just Mike, I'd like to get your thoughts on this, and maybe you don't have no one's come to you yet, but we've been getting a lot of questions and a lot of concerns around wireworm in beans, sugar beets, and corn in areas in western Idaho, in the Treasure Valley, across the Treasure Valley, in fields that have not had concern before. And maybe you could address that, or somebody might address that. I know Eric's not on here, as to possibly why or what growers need to look out for due to that, what seems to be a unusual infestation this year.
Well, I'm definitely not an entomologist, Jeff, but I do know that wireworms are very sensitive to soil temperature and they prefer cooler soil temperatures. Then they move deep when it gets hot during the summer. So it's possible that this cool spell is prolonging that period of activity for wireworms, but hopefully there's somebody online that knows more specifically about wireworms than I do.
Well, I guess one thing I would say is it's very difficult to manage them once the crop's been planted. So anyone out there that has things yet to be planted, or they're looking at that to manage that pest post plant, is extremely difficult, if not near impossible. So just be thinking out there. I guess everybody needs to pay attention to that, because I have a feeling we might see some of these other issues like that pop up.
If anybody wants to hear a herbicide update, I could go now on potatoes.
Please do.
Great, thanks, Doug. This is actually related to what Mike said as far as emergence and growing degree days. With potatoes, the only way that potatoes are safe to potato herbicides is that they can metabolize a herbicide fast, you know, as opposed to the weed, which can't, the susceptible weeds. So with cold and even potatoes sitting in the ground with herbicide on top, there might be some injury as the potatoes grow through that, or even when the potatoes get up, if it doesn't warm up and get really, really sunny. So you might see a little injury. When we've seen this in the past, we haven't had any yield losses, but pay attention to it and contact me if you know, you have some concerns. The other thing is, some people try to get by with putting low rate of metribuzin on specialty crop varieties that aren't really tolerant to metribuzin. So I don't think this would be a good year to do that because of the cold weather and the ability of the variety to metabolize the herbicide. Otherwise, just questions about tank mixtures. People are expressing concern over common lamb's quarters. And so there's some good herbicides out there that can help you in a tank mixture for that weed. And I can help you out with those if you contact me. It's generally if you are going after hairy nightshade with Outlook or Chateau or sulfentrazone or Eptam or Reflex and some of the other hairy nightshade herbicide, you'll need a common lamb's quarters herbicide in there. The ones available for potatoes are Prowl H2O, Linuron, Linux actually, and then metribuzin. And there's, you know, a lot of generic names for those as well. So like I said, contact me and I can help you out with that. For potatoes already emerged, of course, if you haven't gotten herbicides on, which I would think you had because it's so slow for them coming through it. Of course, there are herbicides that are tolerant. Potatoes are tolerant to post-emergence, but other than matrix and metribuzin, and then the post herbicides like Select and Post Plus, the only ones that have activity is the matrix, metribuzin, and those post herbicides. So if you have weeds up, you're going to have a challenge controlling them unless you put those herbicides in. Other than that, if anybody had questions right now, that'd be great. And if not, like I said, give me a holler.
I have a nice segue for that for you, Pam. So Doug, is it okay if I go next? I don't have a whole lot to report. I just wanted to mention that when I looked at the cropalerts.org website, I'm going to share that screen for you. No, that's not what I want. That's the one I want. I noticed that the volunteer potato survival is very great. Are you seeing my website? Yeah, okay. So this is the cropalerts.org website that Phil Wharton put together. And it's kind of a catch-all site for a lot of different things, such as insect monitoring efforts, some disease monitoring efforts. But I wanted to point your attention to the volunteer potato survival effort. And when we look at that map, all of those red little dots on the map indicate a high risk for volunteer potato survival. Our winter, even though it seemed brutal, the ground underneath the snow came before the ground froze. And so this is why I'm assuming we have the high risk for potato volunteer problems this year. Everywhere in the state that is being monitored is at high risk except for Western Idaho. So anyway, I just wanted to bring your attention to that, and maybe Pam, you can speak a little bit about some strategies people can use for managing volunteer potatoes.
Sure, thanks, Kasha. In the past years, we've put out, I think it was with the pest alert, some recommendations for volunteer potato control, and I can do that again as well. And I can also email this group that's on the Ag Talk Tuesdays. For the Roundup Ready crops, Roundup actually is the better herbicide that works. You just want to make sure you get out there. It's kind of, you got to make the timing right. But after on the volunteer potatoes, when the tubers that are growing on the volunteer potatoes right after tuber initiation, but before really get any further with tuber development. And just like when you have herbicide carryover in the seed piece, the Roundup will go down and kill the tubers and then also kill the volunteer potato plant as well. Otherwise, in small grains, onions, and other crops that are not Roundup ready, there are a few herbicides that tend to work well. You just want to make sure you get out there before the tubers below that are growing from that volunteer potato get really far. You might have to spray twice. And the big thing is you just don't want that tuber to develop, and you don't want the volunteer plant to put down a lot of roots. And I think Kasha posted something there online about, or in the chat where you can get that volunteer potato information.
Right. So also in the chat box, you'll find the link for the growing degree days that Mike had mentioned. And Mike also mentions the optimal soil temperatures for wireworm. So take a look in the chat box for that information. When we record these sessions, it doesn't look like the chat box information goes into the recording. So be sure to get that information if you want it. There was something else I wanted to add, and now I've forgotten it. So never mind. Dang it. Oh, I know. If you have a field where you do see some volunteer potatoes, I invite you to let me know. And if you'd like me to come out and sample those potato leaves, we're actually from time to time, on occasion, my team and I will survey the potato virus Y reservoirs, and volunteer potatoes is one of them, just to see what the incidence of PVY is. And also we will start determining what the strain of PVY is in those volunteer potatoes. So let me know if you'd like us to come out and sample if you happen to have some volunteer potatoes. Thank you.
Great information. Do we have anyone else who'd like to share? Is there anyone from Magic Valley on, or that can make any reports about what crops are looking like down that way, or alfalfa or hops or some of our specialty crops we haven't discussed yet? Perhaps sugar beets? Sugar beets in general?
Actually, Doug, in Southeast Idaho, I've seen fields planted to sugar beets that had a lot of volunteer wheat growing in them. And so I think the growers are going to rely on the Roundup to kill that volunteer wheat. It might be pretty big by the time the sugar beets get up and the first Roundup application comes to fruition. So just be careful about that. You might want to go in earlier to kill that volunteer wheat since it is getting big.
Okay. Well, not hearing any other volunteers with updates, shall we move into our regular presentation portion? I believe that first up we have Matt Gellings going to be sharing about FSA policy. Matt is the State Executive Director of the USDA Farm Services Agency as of January 2022. Fourth generation farmer, alfalfa, wheat, malt, barley, and potatoes out of Idaho Falls. if the information off the USDA website is correct, and has been serving in 12 years on Idaho FSA's state committee under under now 3 different administrations. So we'll let you take it away, Matt, and look forward to hearing what you have to share.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Doug, and thank you, Pam, Juliet, everyone else there at U of I for this invitation. Is there any way we could maybe pull up some of that, those fact sheets that I sent you there, Doug? That'd be great, and I'll just kind of follow along. And
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'll pull them up and then share my screen if that'll
that'd be
work for
great,
you.
thanks. I think, also I wanted to say, I did listen to your ag talk, and very interesting last week with Keith, and I see Keith's on again this week there. Good job, Keith. Good to see your face. Golly, it's been a few years, and I see a few other names on there today. Geez, yeah, it's been a while since I've seen a lot of you guys, but
Hey, Matt,
yes.
this is Juliet. I just was wondering if since Keith Esplin's already on, would Keith want to give a quick update at all on what the current conditions are?
Oh, sure.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Matt. It's good to see you.
Good to see
Good
you.
person there. I really don't have a lot new to report on since a couple of weeks ago, just a couple really things really quick. As the cool weather's kept the snow in the mountains longer than it continues to stay. It's interesting, the last few days, maybe the last week, irrigation demands finally really picked up. And so we're actually drafting the reservoirs now fairly significantly because the runoff has just barely getting going. So I think in a few days they're expecting the runoff to pick up, and then hopefully we'll store a little more water. It's going to be interesting, and I really don't have anything else to report other than it's just a slow spring from many standpoints. So, well, within 2 or 3 weeks, we should have a better idea how much water actually makes it to the reservoirs.
So which of the posts did you want to start with, Matt?
No, that'll work right there, Doug. I appreciate that. Thank you. I know that. Thank you for that, Keith. Yeah, great information there. I jotted down a few things there that I didn't even really realize how you explained that, how those reservoirs fill, and a lot of that stuff is very important. And when you said this is really an important year, the world needs our crops. Boy, isn't that for sure. And geez, with $12 wheat and $300 a ton hay, I was telling my wife Kathy the other day, maybe I should quit this and jump back into farming, but she said I'd be really alone. So I probably better stay where I am. But anyway, I just threw this one out on the other day there in March. This administration came out because of they've been getting a lot of calls, and we have been to USDA as far as what's the USDA going to do about the shortage of fertilizer. And so if you'll go ahead and look at that there, so USDA announced plans for $250 million investment to support innovative American-made fertilizer. So we probably maybe should have done this. America should have probably done this a few years ago with all the regulations and everything. The years that I lobbied with the Idaho grain producer, we'd go back to DC and visit the Fertilizer Institute. And they said the same thing, that there's maybe only one fertilizer company in America anymore. So we import. And with things that have happened in the world, that's led us to this shortage. And so this administration, he's actually doubled down on this now. Instead of $250 million last Thursday, they've doubled that up. So they're going to make available $500 million through a new grant program this summer to support independent, innovative, and sustainable American fertilizer. And so I think we need to do this. Now, this is a grant program, and they'll be accepting grants. But as everybody knows, the fertilizer prices have more than doubled. So due to many factors. But the United States is a major importer and dependent on foreign fertilizer, and it's the second or third top importer for each of the three major components of fertilizer. So It's very, very important. And of course, that if we do get this up and going, it'll be made in America. And I've always liked to say that. Produced in the United States by domestic companies, creating good paying jobs. So details on the application process will be announced this summer, and the first awards expected before the end of 2022. So what I've been getting some phone calls here, well, that's too little, too late. Maybe so, but you know what? We need to get going on this. We need to get some fertilizer companies so we don't have to depend on some foreign imports. And if anybody would like any more information on that, you can always go to our Gov Delivery, USDA Gov Delivery site. Yeah, should we jump over, Doug? We'll jump over to I got thinking about when Juliet and Doug asked me to do this, and we have a lot of different programs. When the Farm Bill comes out, Farm Service Agency, we're the ones that the Farm Bill says we're going to do this program and this program. So we're Farm Service Agency, the one that delivers it. And very, very proud to work for Farm Service Agency. So what Doug's just posted up there, we're going to jump to prevented plant. And I'll have Ben probably follow up on his part on this too. What he's got up there right now is our application. This is what, if a farmer wants to come to our office, and by the way, we do have 29 offices around the state. If you have any questions, you can always go to our local Farm Service Agency. We have 29 of those, and also contact your local FSA office. But so with the water situation and the way that Keith was talking about it, I never thought I would ever see prevented plant with irrigated farmers. I always figured all these years prevented plant was too much water. I can't get in the field. Well, we've had quite a few inquiries, and so has Ben Thiel over at RMA on prevented plant. And so Juliet and Doug, we figured that maybe we just touch on that. So of course, prevented plant is you can do that through RMA, which Ben will talk about. But I wanted to bring this part up. And so if you'll look at, this is what, if a farmer wants to go into our office, and this is the form CC 576 that they have to fill out. So when you look at all this and look at what they have to do on there, so there's a lot of questions. If you could scroll down just a little bit, Doug, on that. So see what we're asking them to put in there. Did you purchase or arrange for seed, herbicide, pesticide? In other words, did you do anything on this farm to say that I've already, I was going to plant potatoes on this field, and, we're not going to have enough water. Irrigation district said, hey, we're going to be cut off. And Keith touched on that there earlier that, back in March, some of these canal companies were talking about shutting down in mid to late June to middle of July. So if you'll look on there, so did you purchase that? Did you perform any land preparation measures? So in other words, did you go in, did you hill the crop up? Did you till it? Did you do that? Or the total acres you intend to plant? So the thing that I wanted to prove here was this is the form that the farmer does have to fill out for him on FSA side. Now, of course, Ben will talk about his side. So go ahead and maybe scroll down just a little bit more there, Doug. And so what cultivation practices have been and will be employed? Has the disaster affected the planted cropation? Has it been destroyed? So anyway, this is kind of what the farmer would have to go through FSA. And then if you'll see at the very last there, Part C10, the county committee. So every of our counties, we have county committees that are farmers and ranchers. And I'll jump in right there. Farm Service Agency is the only government agency that does have grassroots input. So our county offices, we have county committees, which are farmers and ranchers in that local area. And so they, this part here and a lot of our other things will have to go through the county committee. They'll have to approve or disapprove this application. And those are the people that their neighbor is the one that sold. That's a good way to go through there and check that out. So as you scroll down a little bit more there, so, you know, you'll have to put in a lot of this, this and that if there was any grazing or value loss of the crops. But I just wanted to touch on that. And then Doug, can you flip over on that? And it's a lot of pages on there, but I just want to just touch on a couple of things that I sent you. So per our handbook, per 2CP, and then we did amend this. So I underlined a few things here on this. So this is what Farm Service Agency, we have to go by this handbook. So as you're looking at that there, this is what we have to look at, the county committee has to look at, and if it gets pushed up to our state committee up here in the state office. So, you know, prevented planting, inability to plant the intended crop. But I looked at that. Irrigated crops were not planted because of a lack of water expected to be available by the final planting date. So that's one of the first things we'll look at, and then keep scrolling down a little bit, Doug, and we'll kind of take a look at some of the other ones there. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on everything there, but and you can get a copy of this. If Doug can probably send you something, or I can sure send if anybody wants to see some of this. I think there's like 12 pages here, but maybe scroll down a little bit more, Doug, and there's a few more things that, you know, so on that. So the producers report the acreage to FSA within 15 calendar days after the final planting date. Now that's a big thing, and Ben will talk about that too. Every county has a planting date, and Ben will touch on that. So I know, like in Bonneville County, it's May 31st. So they have 15 days after the final planting date to report this. So if the acreage is reported after the time frame, a farm visit verifying the eligible disaster. So these are all the things that we have to go by with Farm Service Agency when a farmer or rancher comes in and wants to do a prevent plant. Go ahead and scroll down a little bit more, Doug. Appreciate you doing that for me. Yeah, for the drought there, final planting date, verifiable. So the verifiable information, so if you look at that, it must be collected from sources whose business or purpose is recording weather. So U.S. National Weather Service, Bureau of Reclamation, U.S. Army Corps, NRCS. So those are the sources that we have to look at. State Department of Water Resources, local irrigation authorities. But I did this here. So prevented planted acreage, if there was not a reasonable probability of having adequate water to carry out an irrigation practice. So it looks like there might be a lot of gray area there, but anyway, let's go ahead and scroll down a little bit more, Doug. Appreciate that. So these are ineligible. So acreage ineligible for prevented planting credit includes, but not limited to, not planting because of a management decision. So there you go right there too. So should I throw that crop in, or, well, you know what? Maybe I won't. Well, so you have to look at that if it was a management decision. Failure to plant when other producers in the area were planting will result in the denial. So as you can see, the process that FSA does have to go through with this prevent plant, it's very interesting. Go ahead and scroll down a little bit more, Doug. Appreciate it. Yeah, and it keeps going on the ineligible preventive planting. So they try to cover all the bases if they can. Now that's a good one right there. So, and Ben will touch a little bit on this too. So if you'll read that for this exception, though, so the producer normally irrigates 1,000 acres with groundwater. In 17, producer plants 750 acres and is prevented planting on 250 because of drought. For the 17 crop year, there's no information available. So ultimately, for 17, the producer receives enough water to irrigate 650. Only 100 acres would be eligible for a prevented plant because the eligibility is determined based on the 750 planted acres. So to me, that was a real big thing. And it's just a matter of interpretation. And so if they say it's 1,000 acres, they're not going to get that 1,000 acres. Go ahead and scroll down a little bit more, Doug. Appreciate it. Yeah, then of course you can see that on the timely reporting there. Yeah, timely filed. So there you go. Maybe go ahead and scroll down a little bit more. I want to make sure I give Ben enough time to explain his part there. Okay, so the processing prevented planting claims, they must establish to the satisfaction of the county committee, that's the COC, Cropland feasible to plant, prevented for being planted was directly affected by a natural disaster. Preliminary efforts made by the producer. And then verifying the prevented planted acreage methods, crop insurance data, if the data supports our FSA 578. And then of course you've got that field visit there. So anyway, thank you, Doug, for showing all that. That's a lot of pages there, but that's the handbook that we have to go by when a farmer comes in our office and says, I want to do prevent plant, and he has to fill that form out, and this is everything that we need to look at. So is there any questions? I'll go ahead and stop right there. And hopefully I'll be able to answer them. Is there drought insurance payments available to cattlemen whose pastures are suffering? Yeah, we can jump into that one too, Kasha. If there's no other questions on prevented plant, I was going to maybe throw out a couple of things there. Let me see. So that was for the livestock, Kasha. So the livestock programs, our farm programs are definitely based on the drought monitor. So that drought monitor is updated every Thursday. So if you pull up the drought monitor, US drought monitor, then single out Idaho. The questions that I've been getting over here at our state office is the secretary has made drought designations. And so I've been getting calls, well, how much money am I going to get out of that? When the secretary does a drought designation, that only opens, I shouldn't say only, that opens up our emergency loans here at Farm Service Agency. So that doesn't have anything to do with the farm programs. So the farm program side is definitely triggered by the drought monitor. So if your county has been in drought for 8 consecutive, in D2 for 8 consecutive weeks, then you would qualify for some of our livestock farm programs, disaster programs. And I just want to throw that out there too. Up to this point, from January till today, we have put out, Farm Service Agency has delivered over $40 million to livestock producers. And, they need it. With this drought, $300 hay, that's been a lot of money delivered to those guys. So does that answer your questions, Kasha? I can't see. Let me look at the chat here.
Sorry, you mean Dan Wilcox asked that
Oh.
question.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Sorry about that.
Video,
That- Okay,
or raise hand thing.
Hopefully that answers. Hey, there's a guy I recognize right there. How the heck are you there? Last time I saw you is riding a snow machine and with my nephew.
Yeah, it's been a while, but anyway, I just like a few comments on that drought monitor thing, because we went through that
Yeah,
pretty tough last year. I keep pretty good precipitation records, and on a crop year, I was 1/3, right at 33% of my normal. And we
right.
were still in D1 at the time. And I mean, it was tough on us crop farmers, but we have crop insurance. I actually, and this pains me to say this, but I felt the worst for the cattlemen. I mean, they were in rough shape. And
They were.
I even contacted the state climatologist and had like a 2-hour conversation with him. And he pretty much explained to me that in southern Idaho, our drought monitor designation goes more off stream flows, irrigation supplies, ski resort numbers, things that affect a good portion of southern Idaho, but it just flat misses us dry land and range guys in that equation. And I don't know what the right answer is, other than I kind of wanted you to be aware of. I think there's definitely room for improvement in how our drought monitor is calculated across
Right.
this state.
Right.
And so that's just kind of something I've kind of gone through this for the last year, and
Yeah.
thought I'd let you know that.
Well, I appreciate that, Corey, because I have been getting some calls from some livestock guys saying, you know what, where I'm running my cows, it was the driest bugger that I've ever seen, but still we were only in a D2, and what's going on there? And so I went ahead and tried looking that up. The US drought monitor, there is a place there where you can comment. If I don't know if you guys pulled that up or not there. I guess it's coming out of Lincoln. Is it
Yeah.
University of
You know,
Nebraska?
UNL kind of oversees it or compiles it all, but
Right.
yeah, we
So-
went so far as even had politicians kind of gave them a ride around when we were sitting at D1 and everything
Right.
was dead as a doornail to say, hey,
Yeah.
this needs some addressed. And
Right.
then it started raining in the fall, and you know how those things get put on the back burner. But
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
still think that's something that we could definitely look into. And I don't know what kind of ties you have with the state climatologist and those sort of things, but I thought it'd be worthwhile to let you kind of know.
It would be. I appreciate that. And I definitely will, you know, and NRCS is right next door too. And so I'll maybe try to track that down because I have had a lot of questions on who the heck's doing this drought monitor. And I'd like to find that out myself. So thank you, Corey.
Yeah, you bet. So no, I
Appreciate
appreciate
that.
it.
In fact, I'll follow up with that. I got a call yesterday from Celia Gould, our for Department of Agriculture, and I guess the governor's been getting a lot of calls about this drought monitor and you know, when the secretarial designations, that's why I thought I'd bring that up, and why aren't these farmers getting their money? And anyway, but yeah, that's there's definitely a difference, and I explained to her the difference in the secretarial designations. But the questions about the drought monitor, she kind of had a few questions because when I mentioned to her that all that takes is just a little sliver on that drought monitor in one county, and she goes, you know what? It seems like I always run my cows in that little bit of a sliver because it doesn't make any sense at all. But you know, Celia, we're so glad to have her, and she's been a great resource for me too. But between maybe Celia and myself in the governor's office, we'll take a good look at that, Corey. Appreciate it. You bet. Good to see you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Matt. I've put the link to the 3 documents that we shared in the chat,
you.
so people should
Thank-
have access to that.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, and you know, if there's anything else that I could sure help you guys out with, I just wanted to throw this out too, Doug. We're gonna have, as of yesterday, what's today, Tuesday? As of yesterday, we're coming out with the another program, emergency relief program, and national estimates there'll be, and this is basically the first phase was, of course, for the livestock guys, and of course they realize that some of these crop producers need a little more help. So national is estimating it's going to be, and that's just an estimate. Don't take my word for it, that there'll be another $67 million put out of this new program, and we're hopefully going to start getting some people in the office here within the next 10 days. And we're going to try to make it as easy as we can, so there's not a lot of forms to fill out. So that's another program that we're going to be delivering here pretty soon. And also between 21 and 22, Idaho has delivered over $300 million so far. So when we talk about what FSA and what we're doing to help our farmers and ranchers in Idaho, hopefully those figures, and I know they kind of jumped out at me too. And I remember Garth Taylor saying this when he addressed the legislature. He said, Idaho farmers don't farm the government. And it makes you a little bit worried that a lot of this government money's coming down, and it just makes you wonder if it's going to be sustainable or not, Doug. But anyway, but I appreciate that. And I guess you'll move on to Ben, because I'm interested to hear what Ben's got to say too, and appreciate everything that Ben does over there.
Yes, we will be transitioning to Ben Thiel, but I really want to say thank you, Matt, for your presentation. Much
Yeah.
appreciated it. And if you want to put your contact information in the chat in case
will.
folks do want to get a hold of you, email address
will.
or something, that would be helpful. So
You bet.
thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to transition to the RMA side of this equation today. And now we're going to hear from Ben Thiel, the director of the Spokane Regional Office of the Risk Management Agency. Ben's been in this position for some years now, I think almost as long as I've been in mine. But I think you've been working in USDA for at least 17 years in different roles, also from a farm family in Southeast Idaho. And if you want to add to that, Ben, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Doug. Good morning, Matt. Good morning, everyone else.
Morning, Ben.
Yeah, the Gellings and Thiels, I believe, go back a ways. We farm kind of in similar areas. West of Idaho Falls, my family hails in the Sweden area. So it's always good to, as you come up through your career, to see those that or your neighbors and friends and that you recognize. And certainly there's a level of trust there and camaraderie. And as I've advanced through my career and the time I've now had being director of Spokane Regional Office since October of 2014, there's others now that I recognize by face and that I've spoken with, and sometimes they've challenged me on things and brought up it, but they're bringing up issues, and we've had what I believe to be maybe not always the perfect solution, but we've come up with some, I guess, things that maybe have made some improvements for those on crop insurance. So I guess to cover a little what I want to talk about, and to maybe somewhat answer that question that was brought up on livestock producers and pasture, we do have an insurance product called Pasture Rangeland Forage. PRF is the acronym. It's a product, it's a rainfall based index. It is pretty heavily utilized out in the West. So it's not going to protect your livestock, but it's an index on rainfall for pasture that you insure those acres that you have an insurable interest in, that you range your cattle on. And there's sort of you pick intervals of time to insure, and depending on what the rainfall, there's a certain there's a guarantee that's based on a certain amount of rainfall that's supposed to occur, and then the weather stations collect the rainfall, and if those weather stations record less rainfall than what was supposed to occur, then potentially an indemnity could get paid. Matt brought up sort of their handbook language. We have some similar handbook language, probably even more handbooks. But kind of a key difference between the Risk Management Agency, RMA, and the Farm Service Agency in regards to their insurance product and our insurance product. That's kind of a portion of what they do, where it's sort of all of what we do with federal crop insurance. A significant difference is for them in their insurance program, they act as the agent and loss adjuster, as opposed to us. We administer crop insurance at RMA, but there's a public-private partnership where the private side is a independent crop insurance agent, and then a independent insurance company that underwrites it and then performs the loss adjustment. So there's a little bit kind of different flow of communication, where for FSA, you're talking to somebody at your local FSA office. Under crop insurance, you're working with your agent, and then if you have a loss, you file that notice of loss with your agent, and then a loss adjuster comes out and appraises the loss. There was comments about the drought monitor. I just wanted to also make mention that the drought designations, as far as the drought monitor, don't have linkage requirements to crop insurance. It's what individually happens to you as an insured producer, irregardless of whatever the drought monitor shows. The drought monitor can certainly build into an argument about an insurable cause of loss of too dry or drought conditions, but it's not a D1, D2, or anything. A drought designation isn't a specific requirement for triggering indemnity or claims procedures for crop insurance. So to kind of talk to give a little background on what I wanted to talk about, which is preventive planning, what we're seeing in this upcoming year with drought conditions, potential loss of irrigation water. Doug brought up in the beginning about there's kind of some disparity between different parts of the state. The northern side of the state, although we were too dry at one time, now there's instances, maybe north central where Doug's at, of now it's too wet. So we're seeing preventive planning on excess moisture, where southern Idaho has the opposite conditions. But I live in Post Falls, so I work for a Spokane office. Still very cool up here. Current forecast doesn't look like it's going to get above 70 degrees for the rest of May. Even 65 might be the upper limit. However, I'm glad we don't get the winds like you all are seeing down there. Any precipitation certainly is always nice, but I kind of feel like our spring is slipping away before we get into sudden summer. I want to give a little bit of the recap as I know it on the water situation. Keith Espelin 2 weeks ago gave a good recap. That's on a recorded session from Ag Talk Tuesday on May 3rd. I sit on a lot of water for my job. I kind of sit on a lot of water calls for all of the Northwest to get it, since my states as a regional office include Alaska, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. And so, but to look specifically at Idaho, last Thursday in the drought monitor, 11% of the state was in no drought designation, which means 89% of the state has some form of abnormally dry to various levels of drought designation, with 50% being severe and 7% being extreme. That's an improvement of the week before, where 58% was severe. If you look back at the beginning of the water year, which begins in October of 21, and that'll run to the end of September of 22. So at that point in time, Idaho was 91% severe and 63% extreme and 24% exceptional. So the highest form of drought designation, which if you look at the drought monitor, when they give that designation, that's supposed to only occur once every 50 years, but yet we're seeing it occur now in multiple years that carry over from one year to the next. All this speaks to the very low reservoir carryover we had last year, which even extends back into May of 2021, when 48% of the state was in moderate drought and only 10% severe. And so from that dry spring of 21 carried forward through the hot summer of 21 through our very seesaw conditions of 22, sort of all go into the conditions we have now, where through this water year, October, December was good. We were getting the snowpack looked really good in December, and I think there was a lot of people that thought maybe we've climbed out of the hole and the drought has ended, because we had a good snowpack. But then snowpack plateaued all the way through March, and what the water people like to say is we didn't reach a very good peak snowpack. April through May has been good with above normal precipitation and much below normal temperatures that carried snowpack longevity much later for melt out, but we can't overcome the lack of peak snowpack. So there has been some improvements in water supply forecasts. This is just me. This is not what I know. This is me repeating what others say. But water meetings in the beginning of April, they were saying there was no statistical probability that the present or projected water supply would be anywhere near equal to the irrigation needs across southern Idaho. But now, depending on how our weather conditions play out now through the rest of the summer, because we had those lower temperatures and above normal precipitation through across really all of the Northwest, there's now statistical, although it's slim, there is now statistical chances of some areas having enough supply to meet demand if weather continues to be favorable. However, climatic models still say there's a greater than 50% chance that the summer will be above normal temperature and below normal precipitation through most of all of the Northwest, but especially in southern Idaho. So to kind of pivot a little bit into our programs with RMA and crop insurance and drought conditions, what are your options? And so in thinking about your options, you should base your decisions on whether to plant using agronomically sound and well-documented drought management practices. For example, you may choose to plant fewer irrigated acres based on the amount of adequate irrigation water available, and then claim prevented planting on the remaining acreage for which adequate water is not available. You can plant and report the acres without adequate water as non-irrigated if a non-irrigated practice is available for the crop in the county and you do not claim prevented plant on the irrigated acres. You cannot plant the acreage if adequate water is not available and claim prevented planting payment, or you can plant and report the acreage as uninsurable if a non-irrigated practice is not available for the crop in the county. Or you cannot plant and claim prevented planting if a non-irrigated practice is the only practice available in the county. And then you'll need to work with your insurance company on any of those scenarios. And so let's say that you've been informed that your irrigation water availability has been reduced by the local authority in your area. And so it's restricted. And so you're thinking about, well, what do I do then for spring planted irrigated crops, knowing that there is a water curtailment? So to ensure your crop is irrigated, you must apply, so these are sort of the rules, you must apply the quantity of water needed at appropriate times to produce at minimum the yield used to determine the production guarantee or amount of insurance. The yield used to determine the production guarantee is also known as the actual production history, or APH, approved yield. If you intend to apply less water than the minimum needed to establish your irrigated practice APH yield on the irrigated acreage planted to the insured crop, regardless of reason, again, here's sort of your options that you have. Apply the amount of water needed to produce the irrigated APH yield on a reduced number of acres and report the remaining acres as non-irrigated if that coverage is available. Or you can apply less water to the total acreage than that's used to establish your irrigated APH and report the total acreage as non-irrigated. Or apply the amount of water needed to produce the irrigated APH on a reduced number of acres and leave the remaining acres idle and report them as preventive planting. So what is preventive planting? Preventive planting is the failure to plant an insured crop by the final planting date. This could have, I'm talking about right now on the event of dry conditions, loss of irrigation water, but in Northern Idaho, there's already instances, Doug mentioned it, of preventive planting where there's excessive moisture. You can't get in to work the field because the fields are too wet. So to qualify, you must be prevented from planting an insured crop by insurable cause of loss that is general to the surrounding areas. So there's sort of two criteria that have to be met is there has to be a general sort of cause of loss in the area, and it also has to individually impact you as well. And all this, you have to be prevented from planting by a final planting date. And that varies by crop in an area. So Matt mentioned a final planting date in the area he's from, Bonneville County. So that's going to vary though by county to county and by crop to crop. But preventive planting coverage under crop insurance is available for most annual crops, and it covers drought, failure of irrigation water supply, failure of breakdown or irrigation equipment. Again, all this is due to insurable cause of loss. What is the preventive planting coverage? Preventive planting coverage provides producers sort of valuable protection in the event that they're unable to plant due to adverse weather conditions. The amount of preventive planting coverage is calculated as a percentage of the insurance guarantee the insured would have had for a timely planted crop. So for example, say producer's insurance guarantee, using simple numbers, say it's $100 an acre. If the producer insures a crop with a 60% preventive planting coverage factor, and those factors vary from crop to crop. This is something that you can look up in what we call our actuarial information browser on our RMA website. And so you'd have to look for that specific tab and you could find what that preventive planting coverage is. But for this case, we're just using an example. So let's say 60%. So you'd get paid $60 because it's 60% of that $100 insurance guarantee. Now, insurance guarantee is going to vary from producer to producer, crop to crop. So these are just simple numbers there. There's also instances where, depending on what a producer is thinking about doing, and sort of Matt brought up instances of management practices, and he had places that are highlighting that this year's a little bit unique with all the challenges coming out of the pandemic, the war in Ukraine. There's kind of other, and besides what's localized with the drought, there are issues with high input costs, the high costs of seed, lack of available maybe herbicide, that with all that going on, we still want to remind producers that if you're considering preventive planting, it has to be tied to an insurable cause of loss, that it can't be something where you're forcing sort of, there's an adverse selection occurring that you're claiming preventive planting more to avoid the high cost of seed or input costs, as opposed to an actual insurable cause of loss, a weather event that is triggering you or preventing you from planting the crop. But thinking about preventive planning and your eligible acres for preventive planning, and how someone maybe alternates from, they go from a high water utilization crop like potatoes or corn and they switch to another crop. That's not really an instance of preventive planning. But say you decide to keep your current rotation, but you're going to back off the number of potatoes, but you also come in with a claim of 1,000 acres of potatoes, but you have no history of ever planting 1,000 acres of potatoes. Our insurance rules would say you can't, you can prove that you have 1,000 acres that you're prevented from planting, but you don't have the history of potatoes. There are procedures where you can roll to other crops that you can borrow that history. And so maybe you're getting preventive planning on a certain history of how many potato acres you've had, and you may have to borrow barley or wheat or some other crops history. I just bring this up because sometimes we can have differences data-wise between RMA and FSA, because FSA is recording which you planted or which actually were prevented from planting. With our rules, how your indemnity for preventive planning is going to be calculated because of our rolling rules, there may be a little bit difference in data-wise there. What kind of records should a producer be mindful of keeping in regards to verifying preventive planning? So you can't just simply turn in that I'm going to put in for preventive planning with my agent, and then you just receive an indemnity or a preventive planning payment check for it. There is a process of the loss adjuster kind of verifying their preventive planning claim. And to help support that, to make the process easier, there's some records you should be mindful of in keeping to substantiate your preventive planning claim. Because again, you have to prove sort of two things. One, that preventive planning is general to the area as far as a cause of loss, being it's too dry or too wet, is sort of general to the area. You're not the only one affected. Likely your neighbors are being affected as well, whether they claim a preventive planning claim or not, or they're insured. And then you're also individually impacted. So you must keep and provide all documentation to your crop insurance company, provide that and provide it as requested regarding the amount of water you will receive for the crop year and any justification provided for any reduced water allocation. So whoever's your local water authority, keep good documentation of whatever they're supplying to you. Don't just say, hey, look at the drought monitor, it's D3 in my area. That's not going to mean anything other than just, it's going to go maybe to proving the general impact to the area, but not to how you're individually impacted on how much water you individually are being reduced. So documentation of water shortfalls must be verified from information provided by local irrigation authorities responsible for water allocations, such as state departments of water resources, U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Cooperative Extension Service, NRCS, or other sources responsible for collection of water data or regulation of water resources. These resources are also used to document whether all or a portion of the acres could be irrigated if average precipitation had occurred within the insurance period. And so I've kind of focused on irrigated. Preventive planning is also available on non-irrigated acreage. And so for them, there's a little bit of a requirement on documentation as well. Again, there's not, being at non-irrigated, you're not looking to a water authority, but again, whatever documentation you can provide to the insurance company / loss adjuster that verifies there's insufficient soil moisture for germination or ability for the crop that it would be unable to progress to maturity. So anything you can submit for verifiable documentation is going to help facilitate that preventive planning claim. So those are kind of the various things I wanted to bring up and cover. So I guess I'll open it up to see if there's any questions.
Questions for Ben? Ben, here's a question for you. Do you anticipate any major changes to RMA programs that people ought to be looking for as the new farm bill is being shaped? Or, I mean, anything that if people wanted to advocate would be a good time to start pushing in a direction, or do you hear anything about yeah, changes in expected programming, that sort of thing?
I think there's a continued focus of having whatever programs are considered like disaster relief. Most of those programs are administered by FSA. There's continued emphasis on linkage to crop insurance, whether the benefits provided to you by a disaster relief program, whether that's WIP, WIP Plus, or whatever new program gets renamed, has linkage back to crop insurance, that you'll typically receive more benefit from those disaster payments. And then part of the requirement of receiving those disaster payments is usually additional linkage that you have to agree to purchase crop insurance 1 or 2 years after that. So I just say I'd see that there's a continued focus with crop insurance, although they're providing disaster assistance that sometimes supplements or replaces, to some people's opinion, crop insurance. To me, with the supplementation, you have that linkage being that if by having crop insurance, you're receiving a more disaster payment, or if getting the disaster payment, you're going to have crop insurance. So crop insurance doesn't go away because of these. There's just more interconnectivity with those programs. I see probably still more focus with cover crops. When we talk preventive planning, there's consideration for adding a cover crop. I feel that the rules have improved with interaction between crop insurance and cover crops. That a change we made last year is that you can plant a cover crop. If you're prevented from planting a crop, you can plant a cover crop if you're able to get on the field, depending what the conditions are, before the final planting date or during the late planting period. So right after the final planting date of the crop that was claimed for preventive planting, and not have an impact to your preventive planting claim, as long as that cover crop is not harvested for grain or seed. You can do other things with that cover crop, and this is where we've made a change in the last years. It used to be you could not hay or graze that cover crop until a specific date, being November 1 was the date you were finally allowed to be able to hay or graze. Now that crop that you plant that is considered a cover crop, on preventive planting acreage, you can hay or graze that cover crop. So you have the ability to do some utilization with that cover crop and not impact your preventive planting payment. So that is sort of a change from the past. Something that's maybe some people would view more restrictive is we did put some limitations on preventive planting. This happened last year, something called the 1 in 4 rule. And so as we go through more volatile weather patterns of more extreme weather, where we're seeing more intensive drought conditions that last longer, and so there's maybe a renewed focus on taking crop insurance, that's where the 1 in 4 rule kind of comes more into play. Is the 1 in 4 rule requires that in the last 4 years, you had to have harvested, planted, and insured a crop in 1 of 4 years. So you have to have done all 3 of those things in 1 of 4 years in order for that acreage to still be considered eligible for preventive planting. So you can still insure the acreage, that acreage may not have eligibility for preventive planting if you hadn't done one of those things in 1 of the 4 previous years. This comes into play, I would say, more with forage crops. We tend to have low insurance participation forage crops, say alfalfa. So if you're rotating from alfalfa, and alfalfa is a perennial crop, so it can be there up to 4 years or longer, and you never insured it, and now you're going to go to potatoes, but this year, because you're curtailed on water, that acreage may not be eligible, and you're thinking, I'm going to be prevented from planting potatoes on that specific acreage. That acreage may have lost its eligibility for preventive planting because it doesn't meet that 1 in 4 rule. You may have other acreage that's eligible and you may apply preventive planting there, but that's just a thing to be mindful of in the future, that due to the nature of that rule, I could see, in order for producers to maintain that preventive planting eligibility, because they see the necessity into the future with future drought conditions, there may be more consideration for insuring crops to maintain that preventive planting eligibility in the future. But I think there's also going to be an emphasis, and it may not be necessarily Farm Bill related, but there's more emphasis on looking at, or I guess more incentivization of just planting more crops in general, whether that's double cropping, which is not really a thing we can do out here, but more incentivization on planting soybeans and wheat. How that materializes, there's kind of some things in the works, or things I'm not even aware of that could come out. But it's still a little early on the Farm Bill itself to have too much that I could share or that I'm really familiar with yet.
Well, that's fair enough, but this is very important information. The changes in the rule to allow for grazing of a cover crop or haying of a cover crop, very important stuff as people are starting to employ that more and more in my neighborhood for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have any questions for Ben while we've got him here? Well, all right. Going once, going twice, and not seeing anyone pop up, I'll let you off the hook, Ben, and say thank you very much for being here to share with us. Thank you to Matt and thank you to Ben. Before everyone dashes off, I'm going to launch an exit poll. It should take you just 30 seconds or so to participate in. If any of my co-hosts have any final comments to make, I'd give the floor to them before we say thank you all very much for attending. Go ahead, Kasha.
Hi, thanks, Doug. Great presentations today. Thank you so much. I do have an announcement. We do create a newsletter called the Ag Talk Report, and I'd like to get the next or the very first issue for the year out within the next week. If you have an item that you want to include in this newsletter, please forward that to me. I'd like to invite Keith to maybe provide some kind of water update, and maybe Matt and Ben can give us some, a summary of what you talked about today. And, I could put something in about potato volunteers, the water status. We really want some information on that. Maybe Juliet could post something about stripe rust. Maybe Mike Thornton could submit something on growing degree days. And maybe I can get Eric Weniger to write a little article on wireworm. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you, Kasha. Well, I think with that will conclude this Ag Talk Tuesday. The next one is scheduled for a few weeks from now.
June 7th.
June 7th. Thank you very much. We don't have a topic locked down yet, but I can tell you it will be riveting and very edifying. So we encourage everyone to participate. Tell your friends. Appreciate everybody being here today. Thank you all so much. Thank you to our speakers. Thanks for the great information. And we look forward to seeing you guys later on this summer. Good luck with your growing seasons.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Doug.